subjective, obviously, but somebody said it in one of the main sessions, and it's this conundrum that you want to be the same as everybody else in your genre, but different, and stand out. And that is a really interesting line to sort of balance on. You need to understand your genre first. You need to know exactly what your genre you're writing in, because sometimes we're not entirely sure. Or we think we know, and then we get feedback and realize we're slightly different. And then you need to research, and you need to see what works, I mean, and it changes too. The coloration in urban fantasy, I've watched it change slightly, just slightly, over the past 2 years, and what's sort of popular and what's nice. And so, obviously you need to love your cover and you need to like it, but it's a marketing tool, right? It's not to hang on your wall and be happy about looking at when you wake up in the morning. Does it sell your book? Does it tell your audience what kind of experience they're going to get? And, so, I mean, just do your homework and your research and then try and find, an artist, because there's so many wonderful artists out there, who matches up with what you need.
James, you're up.
Yeah, to build on that, so like when you're choosing a cover and when you're communicating with an artist, you kind of got to take off your author hat and move to art director brain. Because the artist is wanting to do, they want to do what you want. They want your vision to be realized on your book. If they're working with you, if you sign them up, they're like, okay, what do we do? How do we make this great? You have to be the one to tell them what you want. And that's actually quite hard to do. Like if anyone was listening to Chris yesterday, how he was saying, well, I got this amazing cover and it was exactly what I wanted and it was totally wrong. Because at that point, he wasn't sure what he was trying to market to. He didn't know what he wanted in an image. And after going through the experience of learning to think like an art director and as you said, like a marketing tool versus an image that you think is awesome when you first see it, he was able to communicate to his artist, which I believe was you. Yes. Yeah. He was able to communicate to his artist what he needed, and then the artist was like, oh, I can do that. And then he did it. So part of that question is learning to think like someone who can work with an artist as a team. Because when you're joining up with an artist, you are effectively like the eyes and ears of each other, and you're trying to basically mesh a vision together. So to do that, I think it really helps to know some basic principles of art, like contrast is a really important one. But there's also like, do you want characters in it? Do you want a spaceship in it? And that, those principles are going to depend on your genre and like who you're selling to. But so you kind of got to convey that vision to them, and that's pretty much where I'm at with that.
Andrew, if you'd like to give yourself a quick introduction.
Yeah, no problem. Hi, I'm Andrew Dobell, and you probably know me from the covers that I've done for either Michelangelo, so that's Bethany Ann covers, or Michael Cooper and his Aeon 14 stuff. So the question was, what were the things most important on the cover?
What should writers be looking for in a good cover?
In a good cover? I would say it's two things. It's thumbnail and its readability. So one of the most important things for me is that you need to be able to tell from a glance what is in that book. So if it's a sci-fi book, that usually means spaceships, which you want to go to this guy for, or space scenes or anything like that. If it's urban fantasy, then they have a certain look. If you look across the urban fantasy market,
Main character.
yeah, main character in the middle is either sword or magic, that kind of thing, often with a monochromatic background. So you need to be able to look at it and go, I know what that book is about. Two is the thumbnail. When you see that book on Amazon, it's tiny. And you need to be able to read it straight away as a tiny thumbnail. If you can't do that, if you're looking at it and what is going on that cover, then you've lost people straight away. They're the two main things for me. As long as you get those two things right, then you should be okay from that point onwards.
All right. Now, we all know that there's a process involved in working through the communication with the cover artist back and forth on maybe initial sketches, stuff like that. What can authors do to improve their half of that process? What can they do coming into talking to an artist to improve the overall flow of the process? sort of general suggestions. Andrew, we're going to start down here on this side.
Okay. I would say having a clear idea about what it is you want. I mean, me personally, I don't necessarily like to be going back and forth on, lots of sketches and ideas. I like it when an author comes to me and they go, I know exactly what I want on my cover, because then we can talk about it, and it usually means they have a clear idea of what their book is about, which is, not everyone does, but it is really useful when someone has a clear idea about, what their character is. With Michelangelo, it was, Bethany Ann is a badass, and she needs to be staring down the camera and just, grab you, and we just went from there. So it really is about, that's one of the big things, is having an author that knows what they want out of their book.
Yeah. So, being specific, like, one of the worst things as an artist taking a commission is when you get a client and you're like, okay, let's do this. Okay, what do you want? And they're like, a vampire? Male, female, in between? Like, 2 vampires? Like, do we want 1 vampire? Like, what kind of vampire are we talking about? Oh, he's male. And? Oh, he has to be on the front cover. And I swear, I've actually had conversations like this as an artist. All right, how about we look at some samples and we go from there? And what you find as an artist is you're trying to guide the author to find their vision, but it's ideal for sales and for the author's sanity and the artist's sanity that the author comes to the artist with their vision, not the other way around. Because otherwise, we're sort of like, well, we're going to do our best, but
we don't know your book.
Yeah, we don't know what you want. So do your research and then come to your artist saying, okay, I know what I want. I want a male vampire with long black hair, washboard abs, open white shirt, whatever, If you've got those details, if that's your audience, if that's what they want, the artist you've chosen should be able to be like, oh, right, sure, I can do that. Photo manipulation, painting, whatever, there you go, And it saves so much time and stress, and it gives you a better product.
Do you guys like it when authors come to you with reference? Like, I like these covers.
Yeah. So a lot of authors come to me with covers that I've actually done in the past that they like, and they said, can you recreate something like that? A lot of the time as well, I like, if an author doesn't really know what they want on the cover, which happens quite a lot, maybe a passage out of the book that they like, that's descriptive, or it's action, which then obviously I can read and I can visualise what I think the author's trying to create. So I quite like that method as well. So there's 2 ways an author can do it. So with sci-fi, with what I do, authors can be specific. So there might be a hero spaceship that they want on the cover, and it has to look a very particular way. Which is good, because that means it gives me a lot of direction to how to design it. And the other way is, obviously, if the author doesn't know what they want, I have more free rein to put my own twist on it, which can be good as well. But the problem with that, obviously, is the back and forth. If there's too much of that, it can dilute the final product. So one way or the other, they both work well, but I think if you've got something in mind, it's best to tell the cover artist exactly what they want to see.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, we're gonna do some.
Oh, you are going to do some questions at the end?
Yes.
Sure, I'm up. The only thing I would add to that is, I don't mind either way, really, as you're saying, whether if either know what you want or don't know. It's when people are in the middle where they want me to spend a few weeks helping them know what they want that it gets a little confusing. I do like to have comp covers because I think it's hard to discuss visuals with words. What I might call yellow, you might call chartreuse or something, you know what I mean? And we can get off kilter that way. But I would just say the biggest thing is, because my process is, I think, a little different from some people's, I have a lot of back and forth. I go to my author at almost every single stage and say, are we good? Do I keep going forward? Rather than do different iterations, because that just works better for me. But be honest. if something is not working, don't think you're going to hurt my feelings when you say you hate that color of green or you don't like her pose. I don't mind. It's fine with me. But it's easier if you tell me in the process than at the end and you have a cover you're unhappy with. I'd rather find a way. And I've had covers that have been, yes, sometimes you can get into the weeds with some authors, but for the most part, I've had great working relationships where the cover has been very much improved by the author's feedback, and I've really enjoyed. They almost have a slightly, if they can, separate themselves, slightly impersonal eye where I get too close to the art and they tell me and it fixes things and it's great. So, yeah.
Okay, so that actually brings me right back around to the last primary question I was going to ask you guys, and that is, what do you love most about this?
What do we love most about this?
We'll start this down your end, because we were just talking about liking something.
Okay. Well, I think Kristen said when she was in one of her panels, she was the grandma in the group. Well, I'm old. I'm short, I'm old. You now know everything about me. And so I grew up with some of the great, artists like Michael Whelan, all those 1980s, all those beautiful artwork. And I always knew I wanted to be a writer. I actually detoured through acting and singing and then back around here. But I also wanted to be a cover designer, and there was no way, unless you lived in New York or were willing to work art connections or really go full-time and get an agent and all that, there wasn't the path there is now. And indie publishing has just opened up this beautiful business where you can do so many exciting, fantastic things. And I just love, I'm the pretty girl. I mean, all my covers, it's both, basically I do women. There's a few men, but I love girls in dresses, girls in, spacesuits looking sexy and all that. I love the artwork, I love doing it, and I love, as much as I love reading and entering a world for a while, when I'm doing the cover, it's the same sort of thing. I'm in that world, so.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
What do you love most about your art? About cover?
So, I love painting sci-fi. If I didn't do book covers, I'd paint sci-fi anyway. I always grew up painting sci-fi scenes, fantasy, knights, dragons, that kind of thing. So I always wanted to be an artist, and for years I was training to be an architect, but I wasn't clever enough. So my friend was doing graphic design, and he said, "Oh, this is really cool. We can just dots about all day and watch YouTube." So I was like, "Oh, I'd rather do that." The second year, they had a Wacom tablet, and I started using that, and from there on, my passion grew really, and my dream was to work in a game studio, which I did for 2 years, and my experience there was that the managers didn't know what they were doing or what they were talking about, so it was hard to be creative.
So you moved over to authors who know what they're on.
Yeah, so authors
Out of the frying pan into the fire.
Yeah. I prefer working with authors because it's a similar kind of profession. You're trying to get what's in your head onto a piece of paper, which is what we do. Obviously we paint it or draw it, and you write it, but I think the similarities are there. And yeah, I mean, I do this full time now from my home office, and it's great because I just get to paint all day. I paint spaceships, I paint dragons, and it's the coolest job ever. But yeah, so I'm sure if you're a full-time author as well, it's the same kind of thing. You're doing what you love, and you get paid to do it, so it'll be better than that.
So as an artist turned author, my favorite part of the whole process is actually the relationships I have with my artists. Because one of the things that I have done is, gone and found artists who may not be doing cover art yet, and be like, "Hey, would you like to do a cover? What are your rates?" And working with them and building that relationship and adding them, my artist is absolutely a core part of my team. He's amazing. He's quite a young guy. He's only in his early 20s. And so working with him and watching him grow and watching him become better and him helping me, in my work, because his covers sell my books. That relationship and that working process with him has been my favorite part of the whole thing. I do typography myself as well. I do creative typography. I do typography for quite a few authors in LMBPN and also just freelance. And again, that working relationship with those people, being like, here's your vision, like, you know, and then being like, I think that's absolutely my favorite part.
Do you prefer us to stand?
Yes. It's easier here. Yes.
One of the things that I love is when my art informs the story a little bit. To give one example of that is when I was doing Craig Martell's Nomad series. When I did the photo shoot, the female model, I'm in Britain, so we don't have guns, and we don't hold guns, and so the models generally have no idea about trigger discipline. So she always had her finger on the trigger, even when it was pointing at the guy. And it just became this thing that all the photos had her finger on the trigger, so he actually ended up, he was getting comments on his covers about this, so he actually wrote it into the book saying, where she was like, where the guy spoke to her and said, "You always have your finger on the trigger, you don't know how dangerous that is." And she's just like, "I'm just that good, you know." Yeah, she is a werewolf. And I just love those little bits, just that my art can sometimes inform the story and just help give the author something a little bit extra just to help them. That's great.
Well, for me, I started off doing it out of necessity, and now I do it for fun. I still do my own covers, and I do covers for other people because I enjoy it. It's just a fun part of my work. Now, I promised folks, I got asked by multiple people, and I promised folks we're going to leave plenty of time for questions and answers. So I'd like to open the floor up. I'd like to open up to questions from the floor. Does anybody have questions they'd like to ask the panel? Okay, I've got one first.
What trends do you see for science fiction covers?
Well, I think my covers tend to be very similar. Not in the sense that they look the same, but the style. I think my style is quite unique, and you can probably tell, hopefully, one of my covers straight away. But I tend to not look, strangely, I don't tend to look at other covers. I just do my thing, and I try and make the cover work for what the story that I'm being given, and I try and design it so I ask myself, would I buy this book based on this cover? And if the answer is yes, then I've done a good job. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. Trends. So yeah, I think you do have to look at other covers, and like you were saying, you have to be similar but different at the same time. But in that regard, you can be a trendsetter in a way. One thing I'd like to see is kind of classic sci-fi coming back. So one of my favourite covers is an old Dune cover. It's blue, and it's got a Fremen on the front, and an ornithopter. I don't know if you know that one. But I love that style, the hand-painted style, the classic like 70s sci-fi. I hope that comes back. But authors see other covers, and if they're doing well, then they want that same cover. Whereas sometimes I think that breaking that mould can be good as well, but it just takes that first step and trust, I guess.
I think also, for a long time it has just been spaceships on the cover, which is definitely Tom's domain. But I'm also seeing, from my perspective, more people on the covers as well. Yeah, especially on military. I mean, I do all, obviously, Michael Cooper's covers, and I mean, it's all basically shiny, shiny. And Kristin said in the sci-fi space opera panel that she's seeing a lot, that one of the growing trends is having, from her perspective, she said lots of women on sci-fi covers, and I'm seeing that from my perspective as well, which works well for me because I'm doing photo shoots. Maybe that's going that way.
I'm seeing the same thing, a trend back to more figures on sometimes figure and
it goes back to like Honor Harrington and all those covers.
A lot more like the 80s kind of style of covers, where you got a spaceship or an interior spaceship scene and a person. So
certainly with the typography, like the actual structure of the letter, simple and clean has really been coming back. There was sort of a fancy font thing for a while early in indie publishing, and those fonts are generally not readable at thumbnail size. So what you're seeing is sometimes just white font and no neon or fancy lights or anything, and fairly simple kind of, and especially on like the military sci-fi are similar.
Do any of you know for romance or paranormal romance covers?
Well, yeah, I don't do romance. Sometimes I venture into paranormal romance. Reverse harem is what I'm more familiar with. And what's interesting about reverse harem, which I think you might see filtering into paranormal romance, is it's almost a throwback to early 2000s YA fantasy covers. Girl with pretty dress, forest, maybe a wolf in the back. And I just find that really interesting that that style, which was so prevalent in the beginning in indie and YA fantasy, and YA fantasy sort of had its little dip sort of thing, that's now it's coming up in reverse harem.
Usually reverse harem isn't young adult though.
No, although there is some young adult reverse harem. And that's what I find interesting about it. It's a little misleading because it looks kind of lovely girl, and yet often it's romantic. Romantic. Let's leave it at that. It's romantic. So I might pick it up thinking it's a YA fantasy and realizing it's reverse harem. But yeah, I can't speak specifically to paranormal romance because I don't do romance, but certainly reverse harem is huge, and you're seeing this different sort of style.
Jasmine, you had a question.
So you guys were talking about earlier how like you, when authors like don't give you enough info, like when you're trying to design a cover, you have the opposite problem where authors like are so specific, because I'm that person. I have such like a specific vision. But
And I've worked
sometimes,
with them.
especially when you're Frankenstein covers and things like that, it's hard to get that exact like thing without like an illustration or a custom photo shoot. So like what's a good balance with like authors giving too much versus not enough?
If you have a good artist and you have a good working relationship with that artist, you can trust them to do what you want, provided you've given them like enough input. But there has to be a point where you release and sort of let them be artists. So and it does depend on the personality. It does depend on the personality of the artist too. Like an artist that has more of a graphical design background probably copes better with that than someone who is more from the the fine arts side of things. And it really depends on like your personality and their personality. But at any point, like no matter how much management there is, at some point it's in their hands. So it's basically like working out where that point is for you, I think. And then trusting them past that point. And then, once they've done, you can be like, okay, well, this, and this, I would like those changed. And the artist will generally be like, okay, well, I've got those layers, and, do that. So.
I'll just briefly address that. I mean, there can be a bit of trial and error working with an artist. You may not mesh with a wonderful artist. You might just frustrate one another, and that can happen. And I have no problem if an author is really, really, really specific. It's when they're specific and then they dither and change their mind and go back and forth. That's hard. But if you're really, really specific, I will do my darndest, if I understand you, to do exactly what you want me to do. But there isn't any harm, because, again, there's so many wonderful artists out there, and we know there's some others here at the conference. Somebody might work for you better or worse than some other, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, well, that's right. Find who works for you. Find who you mesh with, and don't be afraid to try it around.
Can I just add that also it's sometimes you just need to let go a little bit and just trust us, because we've been doing this a long time, and sometimes you just have to trust that we kind of know how to make a cover that's going to grab you. So yeah, I love it when someone comes to me with a really specific idea, but at some point you just have to say, I trust him, and because he knows what he's doing.
Okay, folks, we've got a lot of people with hands up still, and like 10 minutes left, so I'm gonna try and limit it as much as possible to one person answering each question if we can. Okay? You've had your hand up for a long time.
My question is around thumbnails. You mentioned before about having high contrast and so forth. Now, I'm old school. I still have a Kindle Paperwhite, so it's black and white. How much does how the image look in black and white as opposed to in full colour influence your choice of design? Because I've seen some amazing designs with like vivid pink and bright blue, which look great in colour, but in black and white it all just looks grey.
You can vary. So a technique I sometimes do is I start in black and white, and then colorise afterwards. That way you can get the values right before you even colour the artwork. 'Cause obviously a lot of my stuff is just from scratch, so I've got that freedom to do that. And I think as an artist creates a cover, it is important to check the black and white values. It's quite a technical side of it, but it's just for readability and where your eye goes. So if someone's looking at your thumbnail, they'll go to the highest point of contrast first. So if there was a human or a face, you'd put that on the face. Same with the space scene, you'd probably have like, I don't know, the sun with the ship silhouette. Your eye would be drawn straight to that. And then with the colour's just over the value. So as long as your values are good, the colour will just sit well over it. So I think it's when maybe an artist doesn't really know what they're doing with colour, that's where the problems happen, because colour contrast is quite difficult. So yeah, as long as you get a good artist with good foundations, then that shouldn't be a problem.
I would ask, how do you help authors with their branding? Because it's one thing to do a one-off cover, but it's another with the whole series, and it's going to keep going with the series. What do you do to help them along with that?
I would say consistency of images, so having the same artist do the artwork, and typography. Like, definitely for branding purposes, typography across a series is really good. That will help very strongly. That's what I did a lot of work for Craig in that regard, because when he was starting, his typography wasn't strongly branded. When you get a characteristic font with a characteristic style, saying time and time again over a series, it creates a very strong visual brand, especially on Amazon thumbnails, where you've got that string of books in the Autobots or the series page. You see that typography over and over again. And even if the images are different, provided they've got some kind of visual consistency and then that typography brand, they look really cohesive.
Mine was very similar. I got from a series or a branding perspective, but let's talk about series branding. Do you see those special icons coming in, or I've started seeing them stop coming in the covers, like they're just using typography and pictures. What's your thought on series branding versus author branding?
So you mean like logos and...
Like the little logos that...
They're still relevant, I think, especially in things like science fiction and romance. We did that with the Dark Landing series. The Dark Landing series that Craig wrote, one of his longest series that he wrote with someone, has a very distinct logo at the top.
I created that that logo. I think that logos like that are starting to come back in a big way. Daniel Aronson did some stuff for his Children of Earthrise. Very distinctive logo up top on that. I think we're starting to see more of that showing up, especially in science fiction.
But just a single font can also provide a series. If that font is like a standout font, so if you've got a military science fiction that has a unique but genre-relevant font, and it's across an entire series, and it's the only series that has that font with that particular style and that particular artist's art and background, then it's going to still look cohesive as a series and as a brand.
Push in the front, and then you're next.
So do certain fonts work best in certain genres?
Yeah, absolutely. If the typography, if you can have the most amazing art in the world, and if your typography is off, it looks like a bargain basement cover. And if it's typography that suits another genre, like if you've got a science fiction font on a romance novel, and it's not a science fiction romance, you're going to lose so many readers just from that alone.
Off the top of your head, do you know what type of typography might work with what genre?
That's a fairly technical question.
Well, I was just going to say, if you want a quick little cheat sheet, it's a bit old now, but if you go to creativeindie.com, they had who was that? Was it Derek? Yeah. So he did a great thing where he went through various fonts that work with various genres. Now, some of them are overused now because it's a couple of years old.
Like that cowgirl sparkle font.
Yeah. But when you look at it, though, it gives you an overview. You can kind of see.
Yeah.
But I'd say if you're designing your own covers, to go look at paid fonts. Fonts you have to pay sometimes up to $100 odd for. If you do that, your fonts will be more professional and less use. Don't use papyrus.
No. You had a question.
So I'm not sure if you guys can answer this, because by the sounds of it, you're most sci-fi, but maybe you can. One issue in romance covers is that we see the same cover models pop up again and again.
Yeah.
There's a running joke that one guy has like 1,000, he's the one blonde on the plastic stuff, that guy's like a shit ton of covers. How do we prevent, without, if you're not able to afford a personalized shoot or a specific shoot, you have any thoughts on us? How do we find models that haven't been overused, that are unique, that don't show up on 5,000 other covers?
Yeah, it is really, really hard, and it's in UF as well. You see a lot of the same girls because they happen to be wearing leather jackets, right? And in UF we do a lot of head swapping, and so you can find an artist who will swap some other head onto that. But also there are smaller stock providers. Well, of course there's Neostock. He doesn't really do romance, but there's Neostock. There's Period Images, which is almost exclusively romance. There's Taylor Alexander, does a whole lot of stock for romance. And I'm not going to remember some of the other ones, but if you go on Facebook and you start belonging to author groups and book cover design groups, you'll see these small stock providers come up, and you can find some fresh images there.
Ultimately, I will say that if you're going to use stock, it's going to get used elsewhere. There is nothing you can do to stop that, because just by the very nature of stock is that anybody can buy it. And even if you do find something which no one else has used, once you use it, especially if your book is successful, other people are going to look for it.
My spaceships that I found models for on a secret site that nobody knew about have now been found by some other people, and they're showing up on other covers as well. So, this happens. In terms of a photo shoot, though, really quickly, if you can't afford yet to do a full-on professional photo shoot like what Andrew would runs for authors, you can, and I have, hired a local photographer and a local model to do a quick photo shoot, and it's very, very cheap.
Give me a ballpark, what are we talking
Couple
about?
$100.
Couple $100, I know.
Okay. Yep.
I actually do photo shoots for artists who are looking for something that's not stock. And it's a couple $100.
Right. It's not as good as what Andrew's doing, because it's a cheaper, faster, way of managing it. But if you're not up to the point where you can afford to drop the money for a full professional photo shoot, it is a stepping stone toward that works. Okay. We had a question way in the back there first.
So first of all, I want to apologise because I've been one of those idiot authors who didn't know how to ask what they wanted. So do any of you have a podcast or a book or a pamphlet or something that could teach us how to talk to you about what we see in our heads that doesn't take sense down in
Before I came here, I thought about doing a PDF.
Yes,
Yes.
But I didn't have time.
We'll pay you.
You now know what you need to do when you get home.
I actually wrote something which is what got me on this panel, that was posted on 20Books and is on my personal blog. How do we talk about where is a character going to go on the cover? Like how do you talk to your artist about what you want? So I can actually PDF that up and put that on the Vegas downloads page.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Question.
Yeah, I find it an interesting genre, which when I try to do a search on similar covers, it's all across the board. And even the #1 sellers are direct. So what do you recommend in a situation like that?
What do you write?
I write in the multiverse, alternative history. And so the one thing I've been told is put a portal in. And I hate the idea, but I did it anyhow. So.
Heard a lot.
Yeah, well, older authors who look at them. But also you might want to look at movie posters or TV posters like Man in the High Castle and some of those things. They could probably inform that sort of graphic vision for you. Yeah, that would probably help because it's a very successful show, so alternative history.
Yes.
In terms of genre mashup, does an author need to pick one genre that is the more important of the two? Like, I have an outer space cozy mystery series, and that's been really hard to kind of figure out, because the sci-fi people will not, you know, so I'm just curious, does an author need to say, like, it's predominantly this, but it has this too, or how would we talk to you about having those made?
That's hard to say, but if you want to talk, the one person that I would recommend you talk to about that, because they've done exactly that, is Michael Cooper. He's got at least 2 books out in a sci-fi cozy mystery series. So if you go and talk to him about that, I'm sure he'll give you a great idea. And he's, and I didn't do those covers, incidentally. But they are kind of vector art kind of stuff, but they've got sci-fi elements like little spaceships on them and stuff. So
Alright, sorry, we only got time for one more, but you had your hand up for a while.
What do you do if you need to recover from the wrong cover?
get a new cover.
What's the best way to find somebody? You know, because I've gotten so many suggestions, and then bait and switched by people. You know.
Look at other indie authors in your genre. Ask them who their cover artist is. Most authors are perfectly happy to say, "Oh yeah, I had so-and-so do my cover, they were awesome," or "I had so-and-so do my cover, I took 6 drafts and they were 6 months late, please don't." You know, so you can get good advice from other authors about what.
And not even that, if you just go into the look in the front of the book, they're often listed cover artists to it.
Well, I made the mistake of hiring an old friend who's an awesome artist who's never done a book like before.
Okay. So we're actually a couple minutes over on time, guys. There is not another meeting in here for a little bit, so if there's any other questions you guys wanted to ask the artists, please feel free to come up and ask them. Thank you all very much.